I'm speaking and you can understand what I'm saying. What is going on here? What is this phenomenon? This is what we call words. Today we're going to talk about how we use words and why it's important that we keep and preserve them in today's episode of the Perfectly Honest Podcast.
Welcome back to the Perfectly Honest Podcast, where we talk about family, marriage, and our testimonies of Jesus Christ. I'm Kiana.
And I'm Michael.
And if we're being perfectly honest, we got a really good recording of me burping right before we started this.
Yeah, we saved it. Okay, cue the noise now.
I don't know if we're going to share it with the world. I'm scared.
It was crisp. It was so crisp. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I am really excited to do the podcast again after taking a break. Mm-hmm. This is my happy space now. So
Aww.
I just want to do this we talked so much about the podcast. I feel like in the last week, and I was like, is it even real? Because we hadn't recorded in over 2 weeks now. So.
Well, okay. So background information. We went on a trip to California.
Yeah.
We were going to record an episode with Michael's brother and his wife, but his brother had like a tooth emergency. Coleman had a double ear infection.
I couldn't even be there.
Yeah, Michael was busy doing something else.
I was just working to pay for gas to be out on the trip.
Yeah, so it didn't not work out. But we imagined and dreamed a lot about the podcast. So we're excited to be back.
Yep. So today we're going to talk about words, which I'm really excited to talk about. We talked a lot about this on our trip, and we're like, you know what? People devalue words a lot in the way that they use them.
Yes.
Because as we use words, we're adding a lot of context to them, and sometimes it's like we'll just throw out a word, and because we exaggerate, I can't remember what I was saying that in the car ride.
That we overuse words?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Because of overuse or exaggeration,
Yes.
we decrease the value of words, and in that meaning of like when we use them, people are just like, if a word means too much, then it means nothing, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So like, for example, toxic was like a big word.
We talked a lot about
2
toxic.
years ago. Everyone's like, oh, so-and-so's toxic. Like, cut them out. And now, since toxic kind of lost some meaning, non-toxic is what like all the companies have picked up on.
Yeah.
As part of like their marketing. They're like, oh, this pan is non-toxic.
It's non-toxic. Which, okay, this is really funny. I want to dive into this because like we were hearing some phrases recently, like someone saying like, oh, like this situation is 100% toxic. 100% toxic. Like, okay, a synonym for toxic is poison. Okay. So like if something is 100%, just to because poison right now means more than toxic does because of how we've used it. Mm-hmm. So this is just putting it to perspective. If something is 100% poisonous, what does that mean?
You would not be living to tell the tale.
Yeah, like you wouldn't be living to tell the tale. And so we thought that was like funny because like, especially like, oh yeah, that relationship that was 100% toxic, or like, this culture, or church culture or something is 100% toxic. It's like, it's not 100%.
Yeah.
Like when you walk in the door, to church, does someone
stab
run
you?
Yeah, like no, that doesn't happen. So we're like it's and that's what we can do, I think, with words if we see that they've been overused. Like find a synonym and then just plug it in and see if it's like, because then we're gonna be saying stuff like, oh yeah, 100% poisonous, like deathly, right? So it's so ridiculous. We ranted about that quite a bit on our trip, which is
yeah, just because words are so overused or like really clickbaity and people latch on.
Yeah.
And we just like become so unintentional with what comes out of our mouth.
Yeah.
We just recycle what we are hearing on social media, what our friends are saying.
Right.
All these like buzzwords, and it's devaluing words.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this was kind of like our last podcast, we did talk about culture and how that's used and overused in a lot of ways. Triggering is watch out, guys. Watch out. I just used the word,
That's a buzzword.
the buzzword. We use that a lot.
Yeah, we
And it's
do.
like, it's actually like when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that kind of has a certain meaning to it. And this was like after high school for me when I first heard it used in that sense. Was like, oh yeah, triggering, like kind of like pulling the trigger on a gun.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's throwing you straight into a situation that's like emotionally uncomfortable. Now it's just used so often that I'm like, what was me saying, something like, oh man, I didn't really like, I don't know, like if maybe if we're in like a public setting or something and like we're watching a show, it'd be like, oh yeah, that comedian like wasn't that funny or something. I don't know. Like I'm just giving a random example,
Yeah.
but if I said that, someone was like, oh yeah, that's kind of triggering. Is that really me like pulling the trigger? That's, or maybe like this might be an even easier thing is like if I bring up race or something, like if I bring up oh yeah, that's kind of like a white thing, to do. And someone says, oh, that's kind of triggering. It's like, yeah, did I pull the trigger?
Yeah.
Did I really pull the trigger in this situation? Right. And I don't say, I don't personally like to joke about race, but if I'm just giving an example of something that people do say, oh, okay,
That was
triggering. Oh man, just because you were a white man and I've been suppressed or something like that.
Well, then I wonder, like, I don't know, have we just gone soft? Like,
right.
I feel like we've talked about this too. There's a lack of resilience
Yes.
in the world right now. And it's like any opportunity you get to be the victim, people take that. Like any opportunity to say the world's against me, that hurt my feelings, people really latch on to that.
Exactly. And maybe someone did hurt your feelings, right? We've talked about this before. We talked about this with the culture episode. What did they mean by that? Right? Kind of the trigger culture and the, what surrounds it is basically that everyone means malice towards me. How selfish of an idea that is.
Well, and
right?
how sad of an idea, because
Yeah.
if you really truly view the world that way, you are going to live a very unhappy life.
Yeah.
If you think everyone is against you.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly. I mean, and there are things that do kind of hurt, right? And not saying that you're not allowed to experience those feelings, but just make it a little bit easier for people so that they don't have to walk on eggshells. They might not know that maybe you had a parent who died or a brother or friend, right? And someone might say to you, like a yo mama joke or something.
Right.
And they're just being an idiot.
I've totally done that before.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, what is this?
It was
Tell
like
us.
one of my first semesters at school, and I didn't know that this person, like their parent had died, and I totally made like a your mom joke. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Like some people, we're just careless. We're careless with words.
Yeah, we are careless, and that's kind of a good example of like both sides can be careless to the point where it's not really helpful to anybody. Why should people walk on eggshells? But at the same time, maybe you should also say like, no, maybe I should be careful with my yo mama jokes. That's okay too. Like to feel like, oh man, once I realized that there was a person who had lost their mom, it's okay to feel bad about that. That's not the problem. It's just more like, you don't have to sacrifice that person in the social sphere because they did something that they didn't realize, was going to hurt you. So we live in a really tough environment for that. This is kind of diving into the social issue of just social life in general.
Yeah.
But that's kind of one of the things that can happen if we devalue our words.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I want to talk more about the power behind words.
Yes.
Okay, for example, in high school, I was in AP English classes. I think you did. You took
I did
some higher up English classes too.
I did an AP English class.
And you're like annotating these passages that are just like the words are so rich and have so much meaning, so much symbolism, so much double meaning.
Right. And context. That gave power to the words
and
too.
It's so beautiful. And I feel like there's maybe a lack of that. But on the other hand, like the words we speak every single day, we can either speak life or speak death over situations, over relationships, over
Right.
ourselves. And this is something that I feel like God has really been teaching me. So speaking death over something, what does that look like? That's complaining.
Yes.
That's nagging. That's talking, that's gossiping, talking behind people's backs.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself speaking these words of, oh my gosh, I just hate, I can't believe, like just over and over, all of these negative words, like you're going to be putting that negative energy into the things that you're talking about. You're going to be feeling those things towards those
Yeah.
topics and whatever.
Right. Exactly. And on like the positive thing too, if you're always looking to, and in the positive sense, you're basically turning from yourself inside toward your like outside, basically, and not just thinking about external factors. You're really thinking about other people, right? And so if you're looking to give praise to somebody or give a meaningful compliment. And I mean meaningful, not just complimenting because, you think you should. You
Yeah.
know?
Right.
But also thinking positively about your day and like, and thinking gratefully. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when we choose to speak life, quote unquote, or speak positively about things, we have to make, sometimes we have to make a very conscious effort to switch gears. You might be in your head thinking like, oh my goodness, like this has been the worst day of my life, blah, blah, blah. And it's okay to let those frustrations out. But like, it's also so important to, like you said, express gratitude, express love, like use your tongue for good.
Right. Now, here's something I'm thinking about right now is sometimes because we devalue the power of words, it can be hard to speak powerfully in positive ways. For example, when you say I love you to somebody, how can we make sure that has meaning, right? And how can we make sure that it's just not like, I mean, it's okay to say like I love you in passing, right? And it's not just because and that might be because we overuse it that it has a little less power sometimes. But I think that we can also bring a lot of power to our words if a person can tell that we were very thoughtful, that we had actually spent a lot of time with that person, right? Because then when you bring the praise, you're saying, hey, I've been thinking about you, right? The context is really important. I mean, same within your reading, right? If you're reading Shakespeare and you have this amazing, beautiful context, and the context is the story and it's the words that he just surrounds something, you're like, oh wow, that's so beautiful and rich. Where you go to the social media and everything surrounding like, I love you guys is like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah. No,
it's like, I don't know you very well, but if you'd spent time with me and you said, hey, I really love you, I really appreciate you for these reasons, that's powerful.
Yeah. And it's funny that you brought up the example of overusing I love you, because that's something your parents have talked about a lot.
Really?
Yeah. That your mom is always like, whenever she hangs up the phone, oh, love you. Like, it's just one of those things that she always wants to make sure that that the last thing she said to you is I love you.
Right.
And your dad is like, okay, like you don't have to say it every single time. It starts to lose its meaning. And I didn't really get that when he first said that to me they were talking about it in front of me. And I was like, what? She just loves you. Like, let her love you. But I can see where he's coming from now.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think both are valid. That's kind of funny. On that topic though, it is more powerful, what do you want out of the relationship? Do you want the person to hear you say I love you, or do you want them to feel you, feel that you love them, right? Feel that they love you.
Yeah.
That's powerful. I mean, to be felt loved is so much different than to be told.
Absolutely.
In fact, being told that you're loved might just be a punch in the face if you don't feel it, So, and I'm sure in my parents' situation, they both feel and say it a lot. So it's kind of a running joke.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
It's so funny. So you said the phrase, I've been thinking about you.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most like beautiful phrases that we have in English. Like, I've been thinking about you.
Yeah.
Like when someone says that to you and then they follow
It's like,
up,
you mean that I took up some of your mind space?
right?
You know, like you weren't thinking about all those other things?
There's so much competing for our attention. So when someone says, "I've been thinking about you," or this,
Oh, it shows you how selfish we are, I feel like, in society. But
this is the scariest and happiest phrase that we've been hearing recently. So I listened to your podcast, and sometimes they stop there. So I listened to your podcast.
yeah, like, what did you think about
so what'd you think?
it? Yeah. Well, I know that is the scariest. And, you know, because I think people sometimes don't know how to necessarily, talk with us about it. And that's totally okay. Because it's like kind of scary to like approach someone and be like, I've been listening to you a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we have very different ideas from you and you totally disagree with us. That's fine.
Yeah, that's true too. I do appreciate though, there are some people who say, you know, I loved your podcast. I'm like, oh, thank you so much. And then they continue
Yeah.
and say, I love that you're approaching these issues and this. And it kind of just like puts us at ease because it's like, okay, like we can talk about like what we're talking about. We can actually have a conversation on it,
Yeah.
you know? So
Totally.
anyway, to all those people out there who are listening to this podcast who've said to us, I love your podcast. Talk to us more.
Yeah. So I kind of just want to maybe circle back a little bit to like talking positively about and in your relationships.
Yes.
So we've gone through spurts, like Michael and I have, where at the end of the night, we're like, oh my gosh, like why was Coleman so difficult today? And it just becomes kind of this complaining fest of like, oh, he did this, he scratched my face, blah, blah, blah. But when we go,
and that is
reality. No, but when we go through these phases of speaking positively of Coleman, like the next morning, we're like, oh my gosh, like we just have the best son in the world and we just love being his parents.
It really helps.
Like our words can shape our thoughts, which shape our emotions, which shape our reality. Like words have so much power.
They do.
And I just wonder what would happen if we all tried to be more intentional with our words. I feel like we would talk a lot less.
Yeah.
Because we'd be thinking about what we're actually saying.
I know. I mean, how many filler words, even in this episode, don't go back. Don't re-listen to it. You'll hear all the likes and you-knows and ums and all that kind of stuff. We do that.
Yeah.
We just do that because we're nervous. We want to fill the space. Mm-hmm. And we shouldn't just try to fill the space with words. We should let our words grace the space.
Exactly. But
I came up with that.
That was good. I like that. But like, what are we so scared of? Silence? Is that really the worst thing that could happen?
Oh, yeah.
That you like don't have anything to say? Good.
Yeah.
Like, let there be silence. Let there be some peace.
Yeah, exactly. And that really did have a huge impact. It does when we talk positively about Coleman because we approach it differently. Yeah. And that might be the biggest thing. We pay attention to him first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we leave him depleted right at the beginning of the morning, it's like that, you know, because we're frustrated about the last night thinking how we're going to take care of him today. Mm-hmm. It's just so frustrated.
Yeah.
He's so frustrated.
Yeah. Babies are very sensitive to the energy that you give them.
They are. They're sensitive to everything. Yeah. And it's a wonderful thing.
It's such a learning experience.
Yeah. And it's taught us to be, I think, more patient, more kind. That I think I've become a lot more soft, I think.
Good.
And in a good way.
Yeah.
Very good way.
But I think what really sparked this whole conversation, or me thinking about the power of words, was we had people over for dinner a couple weeks ago. And afterwards, Michael was like, Kiana, do you even like me? Like, I feel like we weren't on the same team. I feel like you weren't responding to anything I was saying at this like dinner party. And I was like, what are you talking about? But I just wasn't conscious of Michael, and I wasn't conscious of speaking praise about him in front of our friends and just building him up and encouraging him. And that like really had an effect on you. Yeah,
it did. And I think in hindsight now, like looking at it, I just see how sometimes in social situations, I think you get anxious. Mm-hmm. And so you might be just thinking within yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, at that moment, you know, which we all have things, you know, to work on. I'm more inward looking all the time than I would like to be, you know? So, but yeah, it was amazing. I was like, man, that really hurt. I had to talk about it. But then I just realized once we talked about it too, it was like, oh, you know what? We're fine. But yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah, it was a really good reality check for me. So the next time we had people over for dinner, I was able to speak praise about you and like build you up.
It felt good.
It was really cool to see the difference, to make that conscious effort of, oh, Michael is feeling a certain way in a social situation. Like, I can look out for him.
Yeah, we both get anxious. That's what it's telling us. We both get anxious. But when we build up each other, we become a lot more confident and have so much fun.
Yeah, totally. So what's funny about that first conversation we had, the next morning I was in Proverbs doing my scripture study. And this is Proverbs 15 verses 1 through 2. And I'm out of the King James version of the Bible. A soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouth of the fools poureth out foolishness.
Ooh.
And it really hit me because I realized how much I had been using my words poorly and like unconsciously. And God was just like, hey, if you want to improve your marriage, if you want to improve the spirit in your home, like you have to watch your tongue. You have to be careful with what comes out of your mouth, because you can create a home of peace and sanctuary, or you can create a home of contention.
I love that. I love that so much. And I'm the one, especially in the home, who will have a like kind of an unfiltered, tongue kind of a thing. So it's like I say nice things, I say hurtful things, I just say things,
Mm-hmm.
And I've just realized how important it is, just to take a step back and be intentional about your words. I mean, we are freedom of speech advocates here.
Yes.
But that also means that you have the freedom to control your tongue. No one else does.
Mm-hmm.
And you should take that very seriously. Mm-hmm. And just say, you know what? I'm gonna use my freedom of speech. I'm going to decide to use kindness as much as I can. Exemplify Christ. Otherwise, that's just gonna work against me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good way to use your freedom there.
Yeah, it's so true. And Christ is such a good example of using his words.
Yeah.
Right? Like his words had so much power and impact, and he knew how to carefully use them to reach the hearts of so many people.
Right.
And to say exactly what
he who is without sin cast the first stone. I mean, whoa.
Yeah.
It's like he sits there for a couple minutes and just finds the perfect words.
Uh-huh.
The power of those words, If he had just said, cast a stone, or if he said, are there any of you without sin? Anybody?
Anyone? Going once, twice.
Yeah, it's like the power of words. Man. With that, we want to thank you so much for listening to today's podcast and discussing beautiful words. And if you like our words, please share it with other people. We would love for you to do that and help us push forward this wonderful message. The messages that we do here. You can follow us on Instagram at The Perfectly Honest Podcast. And if you want to follow us online as well at our website, that is perfectlyhonest.podbean.com. And with that, we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.